Peace, 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 peace. You are now tuned into the vault. This is your host, Sharif Ali. I just want to thank you for tuning in live, bringing you another powerful episode of information. Want to start out as we always do, just to let you know this episode is what's the difference between a public and a private trust. Look forward to giving y'all a great rundown of some very important and powerful information for you to make a good decision for you and your family's financial future and otherwise. So just wanted to go over some things. We're going to start out as we always do, thanking the ancestors, universe, and the creator for bringing us here. It's always good to start out with an appreciation of thanks for these moments and sharing. So always want to start out there. Always want to say thank you for listening live, everyone that's filling into the live stream right now, and everyone that listens to the archives to this recording. I appreciate you. This has just been a great month of people tuning in and listening to the content. So I look forward to bringing you the best content possible. So just want to thank you all. Today is what is the difference between a public and private trust? So it's real simple, everybody. When I typed into the description box, I said simply it's about the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction dictates the where the trust is, okay? So you have a public trust. Now we're going to give some synonymous words like a domestic trust. A public trust will be considered a domestic trust. That means it's created under the state law. Whereas a private trust is created just via contract. Okay, so it's not involving any state. Why is it private? It's private because it doesn't involve the government. Okay, so when you hear the public sector is the government, the private sector is without the government. So very, very important aspects that you want to know when you're actually making a decision what trust you're looking to create or build or be a trustee over. Public trusts are always going to be governed by state statutes. So let's just say, for example, you're in the state of California and you have a California trust, which basically means your trust is governed by it's under the rules and regulations of the California state laws for trust. Okay, whereas someone that has a private trust, they can go into the state of California or be in the state of California but not be subject to their rules and regulations as far as trust. Why? Because they utilize California's right to contract. You see, a trust is a contract. So let's be clear on that. But the difference is the reason why it's public is because you went to a public lawyer. You went to a BARD, a barrister association members, actual what is that? You went to a lawyer that's in a state, and usually that means they're barred for that state. You don't really get lawyers that are barred in multiple states. That's rare. That means they're actually playing at a good level. But for the most part, you're actually just dealing with most lawyers that are just barred in that state. So a lawyer is going to be barred in that state. They're going to create a trust that's going to be traditionally. Remember, they're licensed. A lawyer is licensed to write things and do things that they're licensed to do. Okay, so they're licensed to write a contract that are under the rules and regulations that even allow them to write that contract. Okay, whereas when you're a private person, you create a contract privately, and in turn that means that you're utilizing the right to contract privately, because no state can impair the obligation of contracts. That is the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. So what is it that I teach in my trustee training is the elite. Okay, we talk about private trust. Okay, private trust are things that deal on an international scale, things that where you can take your trust and do business in multiple states at one time, like all elite contracts and elite companies are doing, just because of the fact that they have a private trust in place. Why? Because they're not under any state jurisdiction. They're a federal organization. Why are they a federal organization? They're a federal organization because they're utilizing the United States, which is superior to any state. Every state's under the United States. You all know this. You all know this. So let's not act brand new. They're all under United States Army, under United States Navy. Okay, so in turn, they are under United States right to contract, Article 1, Section 10. And even Louisiana, even though Louisiana doesn't have a constitution, or a, what is that? Yeah, it doesn't have, each state has its own constitution, but it's that one's a little bit different because it's under Napoleonic law, but it still respects the right to contract. So we're gonna keep this conversation privy to more of your common law jurisdictions, which are, and here it goes again. Article 1, Section 10 of usually each state's contract says no state will impair or abridge the right to contract. That means that you have the right to create, and it's protected. It's not giving you the right, it's protecting your right to contract privately. Okay? So a public contract is one that's written by a lawyer. Very simply put. So it's no ifs, ands, buts, or questions about it when it comes to your public trust or a private trust. So the jurisdiction is, where is it going to be taxed? It's that simple. If you have a public trust, it's going to be taxed by the state. Why? Because it's created in the state. See, private trusts are considered foreign trust. Why are they considered foreign trust? Because they're not considered to be created under the government's control. It's that simple. They're not considered to be created under the government's control. Okay? Public is with the government, domestic. Foreign is private. Okay? So when you're saying that you want to create a private trust, one that doesn't involve the government, that's what you're doing. You're creating a foreign trust, a federal organization that gets a federal EIN. It doesn't need a state EIN. You know how some of you all have domestic businesses, and it has a federal EIN initially, and then you go get a state EIN so you can operate in the state as well, so you can get taxed twice. Well, guess what? There are individuals and people that are operating at a private level that only operate at a federal level, and that means that they have a private trust, a foreign trust. Okay? There are people that have trusts that come into the United States, and they have a federal and a private trust. That means that they are operating and being able to operate in all the jurisdictions of each of the states. Why? Because no state's going to impair the obligation of the contract, and the federal government always reigns supreme to the state jurisdiction. Okay? So I know a lot of people say, oh, well, can you talk about this? Are you some lawyer, and are you some tax attorney and whatever? First of all, I'm an entrepreneur. Okay? Just like Donald Trump, the president, was an entrepreneur, still is an entrepreneur. Bill Gates and Elon Musk, all of us have private trust, or all of us have trust. All elite are operating from a trust. Okay? That means that they're operating from a contract. So we don't have to just sit here and harbor on the fact that it's a trust. We can harp on the fact that it's a contract. That means we understand how contracts are created. And that's why I'm going to do an episode on what's the importance of a contract. Okay? Because there's jurisdictions. You can write into the contract what jurisdiction your trust is going to be adhered to if there is a dispute. Did you know that you can do that? Why? Because no state can impair the obligation of a contract. That's how powerful these entities are. That's how powerful a contract is. So that's why it's so important to understand how to have a trust contract drafted in a particular fashion, privately and publicly. Okay? So that's the difference. So public trusts are generally going to be dealing with the jurisdiction, which is going to be on the public side, and that is a very, very important point for you, because you're going to be dealing under their rules and regulations under the state. The state is the one. It's sort of like when you go get your LLC or your S corp or your C corp. That's under a state jurisdiction. Well, guess what? Trust can be held in the same exact capacity. It could be held in the same exact jurisdiction of an actual LLC or S corp. So it's very important to understand that. So when you really think about it, you want to be able to create an entity that is not within that jurisdiction and it's completely legal. You all hear about the private sector all the time. It's nothing illegal about doing what is it that I'm talking about. It is the private sector. Okay? The private sector is run by private contracts. That means that me and you, we create a contract and we didn't involve the government. But for some odd reason, everybody thinks they need the government to wipe their butts. Everybody thinks they need the government to wipe their nose, to have their involvement in everything. That's not the case. You have a right to privacy, and the government protects that. Article 1, Section 10 No state will impair the obligation of a contract. So if me and you agree to it, the only thing the government's going to do is going to look at the contract and say, well, did both parties agree? Well, cool. Then it's not unreasonable. They're not going to come in with their state statutes. Why? Because it was never created under a statutory jurisdiction. There's a statutory jurisdiction and then there's a private jurisdiction. The private jurisdiction is the contract itself. Here, you can Google this. The contract makes the law. When the contract is created, it creates its own law. That's why the private trust is so powerful. That's why private trusts are so powerful. And that is why the private sector is so powerful. Because you're putting yourself in a position to maintain your privacy and to have complete control over your life. Not have the government that has rules, statutes, and regulations giving out statutes and ordinances over top of your life, giving you their opinion, someone else's opinion. And guess what? That's not necessary. The government, which is the public, protects that right for you to do that. But if you want to go into their jurisdiction and you want them to help you out, to give you their guidelines on how something should be drafted, when a trust contract is simply an agreement, it's a contract that 2 parties or 3 parties have agreed upon, then so be it. So this doesn't need to be a long-winded episode. It can be quite simple. What's the difference between a public and private trust? It's simple. It's the jurisdiction. You have to know how to protect your private family estate. The way that you do that is by putting yourself in a position to own nothing but control everything. Okay? You have to learn how to set up your private family estate and put yourself in a position of zero tax liability. And start doing it by not putting yourself in the public's jurisdiction. If you're in the public jurisdiction, which is under the public laws, there are tax consequences associated. When you create a private trust agreement, that does not initially mean that it is under a public jurisdiction for taxes. That is quite clear. It's in the private sector. The government is the tax epicenter. The public is dealing with taxes. Public equals taxes. Private equals non-taxes. That means tax exempt. It's sort of like, and they're protecting your right to do that. It's the same thing with your right to practice a religion. That's private. They protect that right. That's Article 1, right? So as you all can see, it's the same exact thing for you creating private contracts. You can do that in a private capacity and acknowledge the fact that you have a private contract in place, and it's perfectly legal to do so. So initially, it is not taxable. It is a private contract. But here is the key word. So don't think, I don't know what words are going to have to be associated with why you're taxed. The reason why you're going to be taxed is because of, this is a legal term, so you can go do some homework and look up this term. It's called minimum contacts. Okay, minimum contacts come from when you are in the public creating public tax liabilities. So yes, you can have a private trust, and guess what? You can still be in the public doing business, because I'm doing business that way and all your elite are doing business that way. They have private contracts in place and they're doing business in the public. But when they create a public tax liability, guess what? Or a tax liability is called a minimum contact, and that is a legal term, and that term means that you are up for taxation in the public now, but it's minimum. Okay, so in the public, traditionally, you're gonna have a lot of taxes associated, whereas in the private, because you're private, when you come into the public, you're gonna have a minimum tax liability because it's just associated with that particular thing that you're doing, whether it's payments, or whether it's if you're if the trust is receiving money from another entity, or whether it's not, whether it's actually even paying money to someone. That's a minimum contact, because when you're considered an employer, if the trust has employees, guess what? The trust is taxed as being an employer now. So that's why it's very beneficial to 1099 people out of your private trust as opposed to W-2 them, in the respect that you don't want the trust to incur more tax liabilities. That's a minimum contact because it has employees. Whereas when it's 1099, it's a miscellaneous income. See, this is what you learn when you're in private trustee training. So if you want to get into a system and learn how to own nothing, control everything, but put yourself in a position where you can, quote unquote, have people contracted and do business with the trust, but not actually have a tax liability further than just giving them money as a miscellaneous income, you can enroll in trustee training at hfrnph.com. vault@gmail.com, and Sharif Ali can make sure that you go through the private trustee training system and actually learn how to administer your life where you're not personally held liable for taxes, where you can't be sued for anything. Why? Because you don't own it. Guess what? Even in a public trust situation, I'm gonna give you an example of what a public trust is, because a lot of people, when they're looking at trust, they're looking at this thing called a living trust, a public trust. Okay, that's what a public trust is. It's a living trust. It's a trust where you go create a trust and you don't give away all the assets, but you gave it to a trustee, and now the trustee, he's out here doing his thing, but you, the grantor, never gave away power to the actual assets. It's kind of like you gave them away temporarily, and guess what? You can come back and you can come back and get those assets at any time, because it's a living trust. But on the back end of that, you can be sued for those assets even though you don't quote unquote technically own them anymore, just because you actually just gave up control. You didn't give up ownership. Okay, and that is what a public trust looks like. Whereas in a private trust, you want to deal in an irrevocable aspect. You want to give away assets irrevocably and let the trustee manage those things. Okay, so you can't be ever sued for those things because you gave them away irrevocably. You all can Google what irrevocably means. That means you can't get them back. But guess what? They're in a position of control by the trustee. Okay, and so private trustee training is where you're going to learn how to administer your private trust and actually administer your livelihood. It's that simple. HFRN.vault@gmail.com is where you can enroll in private trustee training. And public trusts are subject to statutory jurisdictions. So those living trusts that you all want to go out there and create, you want to look into, you got to specifically look into a living trust as a grantor. Because why? That's public. You can tell that's statutory all day. So here's the three words for public that are synonymous. You got public, it's synonymous with domestic, that's inside of the United States, and then you have statutory. That means it's under the United States jurisdiction, or it's under that state's jurisdiction that you created it under. Why? Because it's a California trust, or it's a Montana trust, or it's a Maryland trust. Well, guess what? The way that we train trustees in private trustee training is me and you, or you can create a contract all day privately. That's protected in the Constitution and in every common law state in the United States, except for Louisiana, which says that you can create a private trust contract. And guess what? There's no government involvement. Here's the three words for private. Private is private, private is federal, and private is foreign. Why? Because it's federal, because it gets a federal EIN if you're going to be doing business in general. If you're going to be doing business in the public, guess what? And you're a private trust, you got to get a federal EIN number first so you can go open up a bank account that you have money go into the business. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that it's foreign. Why? Because it was created without the United States. It's called non-government organizations. You hear about those things called NGOs. So when you all looking at NGOs, usually and traditionally, they're set up as non-governmental organizations. That is what a private trust looks like. Okay, and in turn, just because it's set up without the government initially, it's non-taxable initially. But when you come into the public and you start doing business in the public, guess what? Now it's actually going to be taxed. Now it's actually going to start incurring what's called minimum contacts. And that's a legal term that you need to go look up so you can figure out what is the contacts that are going to make my private trust taxable. Okay, this is how wealth is passed on tax-free. You set up private trust contracts, okay? And not only do you set up private trust contracts, you actually create a system of trust, okay? Because I'm going to share and keep sharing with you all. And this is not uncommon knowledge. It's just knowledge to people that are uninformed are. Trust can pass on 100% of their tax liability to their beneficiary, okay? Period. Even in the public, a public trust, they create trust to where they can pass on 100% of their tax liability to their beneficiaries. And usually that's going to be a private trust. So you got a private trust protecting the public trust. And you see a lot of people, so the thing about trust is sometimes you want to create layers. That's the best part about doing this. Whereas when you're an individual taxpayer, you're already in a trust. It's called the Social Security Administration Trust. That's what a public trust looks like. Guess what? And I'm going to share with you all how that trust looks. So the Social Security Administration Trust looks like this. The government created it, or you think your parents created it, right? Okay, cool. So now you're in a position of trustee. Aren't you signing off everything? Okay, but here's the issue with that public trust: you're also the beneficiary. So guess what? The tax liability falls on the beneficiary. Remember, in a trust, the trust can pass on 100% of its tax liability to its beneficiary. Okay, so I'm going to give you the term and the name of what the government trust is really called. It's called a Cestui trust. Okay, so give me a second so I can Google this for you and give you the right terminology. Cestui trust. Okay, and this is what people associate with your birth certificate. So when you're in this type of entity, it's a public trust. That's why it's called the government. The government's involved in this type of trust. So here we go. Let me read what a Cestui trust is for you. Okay, remember, a trust is a person. So your trust, a trust is an actual legal person. Okay, you can Google this. A Cestui trust, but we're going to use Cestui use because you're using the trust. This is Roman terms. These are legal terms. Okay, they're in the back of your Black's Law Dictionary. I recommend everyone that listens to what I'm talking about get a Black's Law Dictionary so you can't say that your lawyer's talking above your head. Okay, Cestui use is the person for whose benefit the trust is created. The Cestui trust is the person entitled to equitable as opposed to legal estate. This if land is granted to the use of A in trust for B. A is the Cestui trust and B is the trustee or use. So I know that sounds like a lot of legal terminology, and that's why I always share with you all. You all in America, United States, all have, public school educations. I'm sure you were taught how to read in public school. So it's very simple. You can go and read that the trust that is in place, the Social Security Administration trust, was a trust that was created for you, right? Yes, and guess what? You're using it from an equitable position. Why? Because you file a 1040. You're filing from a position of, I am receiving equity. Not just legal title, but equitable title. I'm going to definitely do an episode this month about the difference between legal title and equitable title. Because when you are in a position of equitable, that's the entity that's taxed. Why did I bring up this point about legal and equitable title in this particular episode right now? Once again, a trust is the only entity that can pass on 100% of its tax liability. So the government's not paying taxes, even though they have the Social Security Administration trust for you. Guess what? You are, as the individual taxpayer, because you are receiving the equitable benefits. That means you're the one actually cashing out of the trust. And guess what? That means you're taxable because you're left with the bag. Because you're not in a position of own nothing, control everything. You're in a position of ownership. And whoever's receiving the money in ownership actually gets taxed. You're left with the bag. You're in the position of the beneficiary. Aren't you in the benefit of the trust that's in place by the Social Security Administration? Bam. That's how it's simply put. You are taxable. That's why the individual taxpayer is taxable in that position. Okay? So, once again, that's what a public trust looks like. The Social Security Administration trust that's being created for the government. And you're signing off as, you don't always sign off as the trustee. Why? Because you don't think of it as a trust. But it's public. Isn't the Social Security Administration trust public? Yes. And guess what? You're utilizing it, but you're not utilizing it as a position of control. You're actually claiming benefits as the beneficiary, right? And that's called an individual taxpayer. So, and this is a very the Cestui trust is a very tricky situation, and it's not unfortunate. Just the government created the trust for you. That you don't have to use that. That's a public trust. Once again, Article 1, Section 10 says you can go out and create your own trust. That's private. Okay, a private contract, and then you can walk right back into the public with a private contract, you being in full position of control and not ownership, and actually have that trust do whatever it needs to do now for administering, quote unquote, your life, your family estate, or any other estate. It's just that simple. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I want to thank you all for joining me live on The Vault on YouTube right now, just live streaming. Thank you everybody that's clicked on from Facebook. I want to thank you all live. If you all are live on the live stream right now, you all can type in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of what's the difference between a public and private trust. I hope that this has been informative. If you don't have anything to say, I'm going to give you a minute. Otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you all for listening live. So I haven't seen anyone shout me out and say that they want to ask me any questions. That means I've been pretty thorough in this episode. And so just want to let you all know that once again, I'm going to be coming live streaming every single day this month of August and making sure that I'm bringing some type of productive business information for you to administer your life. You all have an estate, you all have assets. Okay, so you deserve to be in a position of control to pass on your estate in a position where you are in control of the tax liability. You can't control the tax liability if you're in the public. Okay, the public equals taxes, the private equals tax exempt. Okay, it's just that simple. Pamela L., I thank you for joining me live. She said, a lot of study to do. Thank you for the lead. No problem. Anytime. I look forward to serving. Feel free to email us at hfrn.vault@gmail.com to get enrolled in private trustee training, because this information is private, ladies and gentlemen. There's not too many books I'm going to be able to recommend in that respect to be able to do that. Okay, great questions. Please feel free to keep emailing me. You know, I love chatting with you all. So Jay Madison, thank you for tuning in live. You said, as an employee, can you start a trust? Anyone can start a trust. Let's just be very clear about that. Everyone can start a trust. Your children should have a trust. Why? Because your children, who owns your children? Okay, that's the question. Who owns you? Okay, who owns you? Okay, how can the government create an entity for you? Well, they did. It's called the Social Security Administration. Okay, the Social Security Administration Trust. You all know that that's in place. That's not the question. Can you create a trust? Okay, you can create a trust for sure. The issue is do you own it or do you control it? And that's why I pointed out earlier that there's many different types of trusts. There's a whole bunch of types of trusts. Over 80 different types of trust contracts. Okay, so how do you know which one to pick? Well, okay, you have we can divide those 80 trusts into two categories: public trust and the private trust. The private trust contract is the one traditionally that's created in the private between you and you giving assets away to trustees, or just having your trust structure structured that way, or in the public where it's created under the state jurisdiction. That means where now you go to a lawyer and do you see how critical that is? Do you know that a lawyer is under the state laws? That's why they have a bar association card. So what I'm talking about is the elite information. I'm not talking about the 80 and the 80%, the 98% information where, let me go get some lawyer to create a trust for me. Why do I need someone else to create something for me? Do you see the mindset of the elite? The elite practice, they do it themselves. But they put themselves in a position of control. They don't leave themselves in a position of ownership. Okay? So yes, once again, the public side is dealing with the public lawyers creating a public trust, because that's all they can write. They can only write a public trust contract. You can go to a lawyer tomorrow and say, can you write a private contract, and see what they say. They're going to have to step out of their lawyer capacity and create a private contract privately. Whereas in a private, me and you can create a contract all day, because a trust is nothing more than a contract. Okay, so you can create a private contract. And now let's get to, remember in this episode I said a trust can pass on 100% of its tax liability to its beneficiary. Guess what? You as an employee in that public trust, that Sester K trust, that Social Security Administration trust, you can only pass on 30% of your income tax free. You remember, because it's all about you, and which it shouldn't be about you, but it's all about you in that public trust. That trust, that Sester K trust, that Social Security Administration EIN, but it's called a Social Security Administration number. What do they call it? Social Security Administration, what do they call it? Social Security number. That's what they call it. Social Security number. That is a trust. That number can pass on 30% of its income tax-free. You can Google that right now. And I don't need to be a lawyer to tell you that. You can Google this. This is information for you to go fishing for, because I'm not giving you fish. I'm teaching you how to fish. Okay? So you can take in that entity, because it's an entity. You all know it's called a legal person. A business is called a legal person. That's why it's called legal. It's not natural, it's legal. So that trust is going to be able to give away 30% of its tax-free. And where does it have to go? It has to go to a charity. Well, why do you think all the elite have charities? I'm going to do an episode about that this month. Why is it that all elite use charities to pass on their wealth? Why do they use those charities? Why does Zuckerberg put his money, and why did he take the money from Facebook and start dividending it to a charity? Why did Bill Gates do the same exact thing? Have his money passed on from Microsoft to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? Because they understand that you have to have a charity in place. That's where that 30% exemption comes in place. Do you see how we're structured? That's the proper way. It's time for you to protect your family estate and do the same exact thing. Okay? So yes, an employee can have trust set up, particularly even a public, not a public, but a private charity, or even a public charity for that matter, that you control, and you can utilize that charity to do some good. Definitely can do some good with it, but you're taking that 30% from your employee situation and giving it away to your to the public trust or charity in that respect, and 30%. And so let's just say you made 100K. Instead of you being taxed on 100K, you're gonna be taxed at what, 70K, because 30% of it went to your charity. Okay, and when I say your charity, I'm talking about the private trust charity, because trust is a contract, just like the contract that has to be created for the LLC. It's a contract. There's still agreements in place. Corporations, there's an agreement in place. All of these things have agreements in place. Agreement is a contract. Okay, so it's that simple. You either have a public one or you have a private agreement in place. And no state can abridge the right to you creating private contracts or private agreements. That's called Article 1, Section 10. You have to stand on the law. That's what you have to stand on. Okay? So I just want to thank you all for tuning in live. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask. I love answering them. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this episode up, because I'm coming every day this month. So it's no reason to be long-winded and yabba dabba do every day. So I want to thank Jay Madison and Pamela L for asking questions and giving feedback. I always love and appreciate the feedback. Just know I'm coming on every day. It's going to be a random time, just because of my schedule. But I am going to do at least about a 30-minute episode or less every single day. So go to the go to the Vault page or Sharif Ali page on YouTube and subscribe. Go to the Sharif Ali page on Facebook. Go to the Vault page on Facebook, and you all can be on the lookout for me to post those episodes and for you to go and listen. And I look forward to you sharing this information with your friends and family. So what did Donald Trump say? Your president of the United States. I'm so happy. For 4 years, he told you he doesn't pay taxes. He's going to make America great again. You want to know how I'm going to help make America great again? By making sure that you understand that there's a public and there's a private. And you can protect your private family estate by putting an entity in place to keep your family to live through generations, like Donald Trump. And the Trump name is going to live through generations, like the Rockefellers, like the Rothschilds, and like the rest of us, as just being in the correct position. It's just being in the correct position. See, we practice stewardship in the private. That means we don't own anything. We already know this. But the public, somehow, they supposedly don't know a lot of stuff. They think that you can own something. You can't own anything. Why? Because if you own it, you're going to be taxed on it. So Pamela L, she said she's going to be spending her vacation learning trust. I'm so happy to hear that. The best time, I love vacations. That's the best time to catch up on reading. So if you want to actually hear this content, because if you're an auditory listener or auditory learner, you can go to welcometothevault.com and listen to past episodes. A lot of these episodes that I'm going to be doing on this for the next 30 days, it's going to take me a while to put them up, because it's going to be 30 days and I got a lot of things going on, but I am going to post those on Welcome to the Vault. But I've been on the air for over a year on talking about this information, so you all can go to welcometothevault.com. It's spelled out, it's no numbers, welcometothevault.com, and you can actually listen to those episodes and go over just different business information. So if you have an LLC, S Corp, or C Corp, you can learn about how to even put those entities inside of your trust and still not own that entity, but control that entity and take advantage of living in trust. Okay, why do you think on the back of the money it says "In God We Trust"? Because they're practicing stewardship. They don't own anything. They control everything. They control the money, and that's why people think they control their lives. Don't they control what they control the inflation rate and all these different things? But they're in control of it. You're supposed to be in control of your mind, in control of your life. That's what I encourage you all to do. That's how we make America great again. So we can go out and do some good. Just to put you all on notice, America, the United States, is the #1 giving country in the world. This is the most humanitarian country in the world. So by putting yourself in the correct tax position, putting yourself in the best position to protect your family estate, you can go out and do the world some good. I believe in those principles. Okay? So I look forward to joining you all next tomorrow, actually. So be on the lookout for the episode posting. Once again, Sharif Ali on YouTube and Facebook, and The Vault on Facebook. And peace and love and blessings. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Get in contact with us, hfrn.vault@gmail.com, enroll in private trustee training. Peace.